I have put 499 overall everything quarterbacks in this draft class. 3 of them are projected in the top 5, and 1 of them is projected to go undrafted. I highly doubt that'll happen, but I guess we will find out. Meet the Knight quadruplets, and please don't ask why they look different. It is a touchy subject. And quarterback Darius Knight is the first one expected to go off the board, followed by Dylan Knight, followed by Zach Knight. And at the bottom of the quarterback pool here is Anthony Knight. He is a projected undrafted free agent. He is still a 99 overall everything, and I'm really curious to see how early a CPU will take a player that is projected to go undrafted if they know that they are this good. And for whatever reason, it skipped right to the Eagles pick. I don't really know why, so I guess we will find out in the draft recap where everyone went. I was kind of hoping to see them get drafted, but I guess that's not happening. And the number 1 pick belonged to the Jaguars, so they did not take a quarterback, but the number 2 pick belonged to the Washington Commanders, and they take quarterback Darius Knight. And the number 3 pick belonged to the Cardinals. They did not take a quarterback either, obviously, and the Atlanta Falcons have taken Dylan Knight with the 4th overall pick. And then with the 5th overall pick, the Jets will take quarterback Zach Knight. And the last quarterback, Anthony Knight, actually goes undrafted, so we will have to see where he signs. And Anthony Knight has signed with the Detroit Lions, and he is already a superstar X Factor. He does not start with a hidden dev trait. And yeah, it is a 1-year contract with the Lions, so he will immediately be able to go into free agency next year and probably get paid. I assume he already has his superstar X Factor because he was undrafted. I don't know, I've never seen an undrafted rookie be a superstar X Factor, but I guess they don't come in with a hidden dev trait. And I'm about to simulate season 1 of their careers. I assume one of these guys will win Rookie of the Year. Hell, one of them may win MVP. And it looks like Dylan Knight has already been voted a captain on the Falcons. And we will check stats here in a minute, but the Commanders finished season 1 15-2. So adding Darius Knight to that team definitely improved it. But Dylan Knight and the Falcons go 7-10 and completely miss the playoffs. But Zach Knight and the Jets go 11-6 and win the division. And over in Detroit, undrafted rookie Anthony Knight goes 7-10, and now he can leave that franchise. Darius Knight throws for 5,000 yards, 46 touchdowns, and only 7 interceptions. Forget Rookie of the Year, that might actually win MVP. Did he do anything on the ground? 41 attempts and 3 touchdowns. And over in Atlanta, Dylan Knight throws for 4,600 yards, 31 touchdowns, and 11 interceptions. On the ground, did he do anything? He ran 43 times for 255 yards and 2 touchdowns. And over in New York, Zach Knight throws for 4,700 yards, 38 touchdowns to 7 interceptions. He also had a really good year. And on the ground, he ran 46 times and got 5 touchdowns. And now finally over in Detroit, Anthony Knight throws for 4,900 yards, 38 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. And on the ground, he ran 55 times for 1 touchdown. And here is how the playoffs have played out. The Washington Commanders, led by rookie quarterback Darius Knight, are in the Super Bowl as the 1 seed. Sadly, the Jets got bounced in the wildcard round, so Zach Knight does not win a playoff game in his first year. And it only took 1 season for Darius Knight to win a Super Bowl. He beats the Titans 49-24, gets Super Bowl MVP, League MVP, and Offensive Rookie of the Year. And there is no offseason drama. Anthony Knight returns to the Lions. Let's see what this contract looks like. It is just another 1-year deal for $50 million. Okay, they may have franchise tagged him, to be honest. And obviously the other 3 are on the same teams because they were all first round picks, so we probably won't see them possibly switch teams for 4 to 5 seasons. Last season they went 15-2 and won the Super Bowl. This year the Commanders once again get the 1 seed but go 14-3. And Atlanta actually did worse than last year. Dylan Knight goes 5-12. And for the 2nd season in a row, the Jets go 11-6 and win the division. But the Lions do a hell of a lot better. They went 7-10 last year. This year they go 13-4. And Darius Knight doesn't throw for 5,000 yards this year, but does throw for 4,800 yards, 45 touchdowns, and only 6 interceptions. And did he do anything on the ground? 60 carries for 1 touchdown. And over in Atlanta, where they go 5-12, Dylan Knight did have a much better year. 4,700 yards, 42 touchdowns, and 11 interceptions. Did he do anything on the ground? 42 carries for 3 touchdowns. And for the Jets, quarterback Zach Knight, 4,400 yards, 47 touchdowns to 14 interceptions. And how about running the ball? He ran 48 times for 1 touchdown. And over in Detroit, Anthony Knight, 5,400 yards, 48 touchdowns, and 18 interceptions. All three of those stats are the highest we have seen out of these four quarterbacks. And on the ground, he ran 35 times for 1 touchdown. And here is the playoff bracket for this season. As you can tell, Washington is back in the Super Bowl. The Jets got bounced in the wildcard round, so Zach Knight still has not won a playoff game. And it looks like we had a matchup of two 99 overall quarterbacks in the conference championship game, and quarterback Darius Knight gets the win 38-31. And for the second year in a row, the Commanders win the Super Bowl 35-24. Darius Knight once again gets Super Bowl MVP and league MVP. And after only signing a 1-year contract last season, it looks like Anthony Knight has returned to Detroit. And it is another 1-year contract, this one for $53.2 million. My God. And now at the end of season 3, the Commanders, who have won the last 2 Super Bowls, go 8-9 and are completely out of the playoffs. But over in Atlanta, quarterback Dylan Knight will finally see his first playoff game. They go 11-6 and win the division. And for the first time in his career, Zach Knight will not play in a playoff game. They go 8-9 and miss the playoffs. And for the second straight year, Detroit wins their division. This time they go 10-7, but they get into the playoffs, and this time they won't have to run into Darius Knight and the Commanders. Darius Knight still had a pretty solid year, 4,900 yards, 42 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. And on the ground, he ran 38 times for 4 touchdowns. And over in Atlanta, Dylan Knight breaks the record that Anthony Knight set last year by throwing for the most passing yards out of these 4 in their careers, with 5,500 and then 44 touchdowns and 13 interceptions. And did he do anything on the ground? 44 carries, but no touchdowns. And over with the Jets, Zach Knight throws for 4,100 yards, almost 4,200, 38 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. And on the ground, he ran 46 times, but also no touchdowns. And over in Detroit, Anthony Knight throws for nearly 5,000 yards, 45 touchdowns, and 11 interceptions, and running the ball 42 carries for 3 touchdowns. And for the first time in this series, we do not get to see one of our quarterbacks in the Super Bowl. It looks like the Lions lost in the conference championship round for the second straight year, and the Falcons lost in the divisional round. And the Giants win the 3rd Super Bowl here in this video, 42-24, and none of our guys win any sort of awards. And we have our first player to change teams. Quarterback Anthony Knight has decided to sign with the Texans. I think the Lions may have franchise tagged him 2 years in a row, so let's go see what this new contract looks like. He signed a 7-year, $353 million contract. Are you kidding me? That is huge. At the end of season 4, the Commanders bounced back from going 8-9 and finished 13-4 and are the 1 seed in the NFC side. And for the second year in a row, Dylan Knight and the Falcons go 11-6 and win the division. And for the second straight year, Zach Knight and the Jets will miss the playoffs. They go 9-8. And now led by quarterback Anthony Knight, the Texans go 10-7, don't win the division, but they still get into the playoffs. And for the second time in his career, quarterback Darius Knight throws for over 5,000 yards, gets 43 touchdowns and 13 interceptions. And did he do anything on the ground? He ran for another 2 scores. And for the second year in a row in Atlanta, Dylan Knight throws for 5,000 yards, gets 49 touchdowns and 10 interceptions. 49 is a high for this video, none of them have done that yet. And on the ground, Knight runs for another 3 scores. And Zach Knight did not have a bad year on the Jets, 4,500 yards, 36 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. And on the ground, he ran 44 times but got 1 touchdown. And in his first year for the Texans, Anthony Knight throws for 5,400 yards, 45 touchdowns to 14 interceptions. He also ran 34 times for 181 yards, but no touchdowns. And as of right now, it looks like that massive contract the Texans gave Anthony Knight might pay off. They are in the Super Bowl, his first year there. The Commanders lose their first playoff game with Darius Knight in the conference championship round. And it looks like the Falcons and quarterback Dylan Knight got bounced in the wildcard round against the Buccaneers. And quarterback Anthony Knight gets his first Super Bowl victory with the Texans, 27-24 over the Giants. And Dylan Knight actually won league MVP for the Falcons. And we have our second team change. Zach Knight has left the Jets. I guess they did not do his 5th year option. So he was a free agent this year and he has signed with the San Francisco 49ers. And it looks like he has signed the same contract as Anthony Knight, 7 years, $353 million. And look who his backup quarterback is yet again. That's a little sad for Zach Wilson. And for the 4th time in 5 years, the Commanders get the 1 seed in the NFC, and this time they do it going 14-3. But for the first time in 2 years, the Falcons will not see the playoffs. They fall this year 5-12. And maybe that big contract is going to pay off for the 49ers. They go 12-5, win the division, and Zach Knight gets to go to his first playoff game in 2 years. And after winning the Super Bowl last year, the Texans go 5-12 and obviously will not go to the playoffs. And I think Darius Knight just had the best year of his career. 5,200 yards, 53 touchdowns, which is definitely the record for this video, and 8 interceptions. Did he run the ball at all? He ran 57 times for 1 touchdown. And for his 3rd straight year, Dylan Knight throws for 5,000 yards in Atlanta, 39 touchdowns, but this time 22 interceptions, which is by far the most any of these guys have thrown in this video. And did he do anything on the ground? He got 1 extra touchdown. Yeah, I would say as of right now, Zach Knight is working out for the 49ers. 4,100 yards, which I think is the lowest in this video, but 50 touchdowns and 8 interceptions, and then on the ground 134 carries for 749 yards and 6 touchdowns. And over in Houston, for the 2nd straight year, Anthony Knight throws over 5,000 yards, 35 touchdowns, and 13 interceptions. And on the ground, 36 carries, 207 yards, and 5 touchdowns. And now Darius Knight and the Commanders could win their 3rd Super Bowl in 5 years, and Zach Knight and the 49ers get bounced in the wildcard round. So Zach Knight falls to 0-3 in his career in playoff games. And quarterback Darius Knight wins his 3rd Super Bowl. He is still in his rookie contract. This is a contract year for him, but he also gets his 3rd Super Bowl MVP, and for the first time in his career, Zach Knight wins league MVP. I'm going to assume that Darius Knight signed his contract in like the last year of his rookie deal, because it says he has an 8-year contract worth $187 million. These other guys all have $50 million cap hits on their contract, and he doesn't appear to have that, so I think Darius Knight kind of gave them a discount. And quarterback Dylan Knight has only signed a 1-year contract with the Falcons. That may have been a franchise tag, but he could be leaving after this season. And at the end of season 6 here, the Commanders are 10-7. They do not win the division, but they are going back to the playoffs. And in possibly his last year with the Falcons, Dylan Knight goes 11-6, and they do get into the playoffs, as this division looks pretty stacked. 2 12-5 teams, but the Falcons get in as a wild card. And Zach Knight and the 49ers go 13-4, and they get the 1 seed. So for the first time in Zach Knight's career, he will see the divisional round, but that's because he's not playing in the wildcard round. And Anthony Knight and the Texans are also going to the playoffs. They finish 11-6 and get in as a wild card. And Darius Knight throws for 4,900 yards, 44 touchdowns, and only 9 interceptions. Running the ball, let's see what he did, 33 carries for 2 touchdowns. And now for the 4th year in a row, Dylan Knight has thrown for over 5,000 yards. He gets 44 touchdowns and 11 interceptions. And running the ball, he got 44 carries for 2 touchdowns. And Zach Knight for the 49ers throws 4,500 yards, 44 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions. And on the ground, this team seems to run the ball with the quarterback a bit more. 125 carries, 781 yards, and 9 touchdowns. And over in Houston, Anthony Knight breaks the record for this video of passing yards in a single season with 5,549 touchdowns, 15 interceptions, and he ran the ball 42 times for 1 touchdown. And it took 6 seasons, but this is the first playoff bracket with all 4 of our quarterbacks. And the Super Bowl this year will be a battle for Texas, as the Texans get back to the Super Bowl. So they win a Super Bowl, go 5-12, and then get back to a Super Bowl. A little bit weird. The Commanders get bounced in the wildcard round, so they will not defend their title, obviously. And the 49ers win a playoff game, which means Zach Knight finally wins a playoff game in his career, but then he gets bounced in the conference championship. And then I almost completely forgot to talk about the Falcons. They lost in the wildcard round as well, so 2 of our 4 quarterbacks lose in their first playoff game this year. And the Texans win their 2nd Super Bowl in 3 years, but the MVP is not Anthony Knight, but the league MVP for the 2nd straight year is Zach Knight. And it looks like in the middle of the last season, Dylan Knight did re-sign with Atlanta for 7 years and $385 million. And the Commanders have bounced back pretty well from going 10-7 last year. They go 15-2, which is the best record they've had since Darius Knight's rookie season. And the Falcons also had another really good year, but still could not win the division. They go 12-5 and they get in as a wildcard team. And for the third straight year, the 49ers win their division. This time they go 11-6, so Zach Knight is headed back to the playoffs. And then the defending Super Bowl champion, the Houston Texans, go 13-4, led by quarterback Anthony Knight, and I believe that is the best record of his career. And Darius Knight has an absolutely insane season, 4,900 yards, 44 touchdowns, only 5 interceptions. That is ridiculous. And on the ground, he ran 48 times for 2 touchdowns. And now for the 5th year in a row, Dylan Knight has gone over 5,000 yards. He had 43 touchdowns and 10 interceptions. And on the ground, he ran for another 2 touchdowns. And now for his 3rd season in San Francisco, Zach Knight throws for 4,000 yards, 41 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. And on the ground, he runs for another 819 yards and 8 touchdowns. And in the last season, Anthony Knight threw for the most yards we had seen in this video. Well, he decided to break that again with 5,714 yards, 45 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions. And on the ground, 54 carries for another 4 touchdowns. And for the 2nd straight year, all 4 quarterbacks are in the playoffs. 2 of them are the 1 seed. So hopefully, we can finally get a matchup in the Super Bowl between 2 of our quarterbacks. And sadly, we do not get a Super Bowl between 2 of our quarterbacks, but we do get at least one of them in there. And we got an NFC Championship game between them as Darius Knight knocks out Zach Knight in the Conference Championship round. And then also, Houston failed to even win a playoff game. They lost 28-21 in the divisional round, and the Falcons lose in the wildcard round for the 2nd straight year. And for the first time in this video, one of our quarterbacks actually loses in the Super Bowl 27-24, but Anthony Knight gets his first league MVP. And there were no real contract updates or anything like that. No one switched teams, so I jumped to the end of Season 8 where the Commanders go 12-5. And in Season 8, the Falcons come in with the best record of Dylan Knight's career, 13-4. And the 49ers will be the 1 seed this year as they go 14-3. And then the Texans will sneak into the playoffs at 9-8. Both times they won the Super Bowl, they did not win their division, so maybe that's their strategy this time. And Darius Knight finishes this year with over 5,000 yards, 44 touchdowns to 9 interceptions, and on the ground he ran for another 4 scores. And now for the 6th year in a row, Dylan Knight throws for over 5,300 yards, 44 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions, and on the ground he ran for 269 yards and 1 more touchdown. But the 9 interceptions is the first time in Dylan Knight's career where he did not throw double-digit picks. And Zach Knight had another very solid year for the 49ers, almost 4,200 yards, 45 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, and on the ground he ran 158 times for 955 yards and 11 touchdowns. And over in Houston, Anthony Knight throws for almost 4,900 yards, 45 touchdowns, and 13 interceptions, and on the ground he ran 48 times but got no touchdowns. And for the 3rd year in a row, all 4 of our quarterbacks once again are in the playoffs, so let's hope that we can finally get a Super Bowl between 2 of them. And we will not get a Super Bowl matchup because the Texans are the only ones in the AFC side with one of our quarterbacks, and they lost in the divisional round to Jacksonville, who will take on Zach Knight in the Super Bowl, and Zach Knight has already gotten by Darius Knight, and it looks like Dylan Knight lost to Darius Knight in the divisional round, but they finally at least won in the wildcard round. They had lost the last 2 years. And Zach Knight gets his first Super Bowl of his career, 28-14 over Jacksonville. He does not get Super Bowl MVP, but he did get League MVP and Offensive Player of the Year. And just like last season, no one changed teams, so I went ahead and jumped right to the end of the year, and the Commanders finished 11-6. And for the first time in 3 years, we will not see all of our quarterbacks in the playoffs. The Falcons go 6-11 and miss the playoffs, and it looks like they lost 6 games in a row. So at one point they were 6-5. And after winning the Super Bowl last year, the 49ers will completely miss the playoffs. They finish 8-9. And then we have the Texans, who will get into the playoffs as a wild card at 10-7. And Darius Knight with another pretty solid year, 4,700 yards, 42 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions. And on the ground, he ran for 300 yards and 2 touchdowns. And at this point, I just expect it from Dylan Knight. For the 7th straight year, he throws over 5,000 yards, 39 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. And on the ground, he ran 47 times for 1 more touchdown. And this season, Zach Knight with almost 4,200 yards, 32 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. And he led the team in rushing yards, 152 attempts, 941 yards, and 10 touchdowns. And then Anthony Knight coming in with, I think, his best touchdown to interception ratio of his career. Almost 5,000 yards, 43 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. I believe he's only thrown under 10 picks one other time in his entire career. And then also he ran for 49 times, 310 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And we were so close to having 2 of our quarterbacks in the Super Bowl, but the Commanders fall in the NFC Championship game for the second year in a row, and the Texans will take on Chicago. And the Chicago Bears absolutely smacked the Texans in the Super Bowl 45-14, and Joe Burrow wins MVP. So for the first time since I believe 2025, none of our guys win the MVP. Yeah, the last one to do it was Patrick Mahomes. And now we are at the end of season 10, and the Commanders have gone 14-3 and will be the 1 seed. And the Falcons will also be getting into the playoffs at 10-7 as a wild card. And over in San Francisco, Zach Knight has led them to an 11-6 record, and they win the division. And it's not a very pretty division over here in the AFC South, but the Texans win it at 9-8. And Darius Knight comes in with 4,700 yards, 42 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions, and running the ball, he ran in for another 2 scores. And now for an 8th year in a row, Dylan Knight has gone over 5,000 passing yards with 49 touchdowns and 11 interceptions, and running the ball, he ran in another 2 touchdowns. And for the 49ers, Zach Knight comes in with 4,100 yards, 35 touchdowns, and only 5 interceptions. And then running the ball, he doesn't have to lead the team in rushing again, which is nice for him. He has 897 yards and 11 touchdowns. And for the Texans, Anthony Knight throws 5,200 yards, but only 31 touchdowns, which is a career low for him, and 12 interceptions. And then on the ground, Knight runs in for another 2 scores. And yet again, all 4 quarterbacks make the playoffs, so we're going to hope the Texans can win out the AFC side, and then we can hopefully finally have a matchup between 2 of our quarterbacks. Well, we at least got a few matchups in the playoffs between the 2 99 overall quarterbacks, but it will come down to the Washington Commanders and the Pittsburgh Steelers. And for the second time in his career, Darius Knight loses in the Super Bowl, this time 27-30 to Pittsburgh, and Zach Knight wins the NFL MVP and the Offensive Player of the Year award. And once again, no one has changed teams, so I am just jumping to the end of Season 11. And at the end of Season 11, the Commanders are 14-3, so they are still pretty dominant with Darius Knight. And the Falcons will miss the playoffs as they finish 8-9. And for the second year in a row, the 49ers will go 11-6 and get into the playoffs as a wildcard team. And the Texans will finish this season 12-5, and they are the 1 seed in the AFC side. And for the first time in a couple of years, Darius Knight does throw for over 5,000 yards, 44 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions. And on the ground, he ran for another 3 touchdowns. And for the first time since his second year in the league, Dylan Knight does not hit 5,000 passing yards. He finishes with almost 4,900, 44 touchdowns, and 14 interceptions. And running the ball, he ran for another 2 touchdowns. And over in San Francisco, Zach Knight throws for almost 4,300 yards, 32 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions. His running back ran for 22 touchdowns, which is ridiculous, but he ran for 758 yards and another 12 touchdowns. And Anthony Knight will finish this year with 5,100 yards, 40 touchdowns to 10 interceptions, and on the ground he ran 40 times and got 3 more touchdowns. And we were once again so close to having a matchup between 2 of our quarterbacks in the Super Bowl, but the 49ers lose in the NFC Championship game, so the Texans will take on the Vikings. And for the first time in a few seasons, we finally see one of our quarterbacks win another Super Bowl. Anthony Knight gets his 3rd Super Bowl win with the Texans and his 2nd Super Bowl MVP. And now at the end of Season 12, the Commanders are 10-7 and will get into the playoffs as a wildcard team. And the Falcons rebound nicely from going 8-9 last year to going 11-6 this year and winning the division. And the 49ers actually get the 1 seed in the NFC side with an 11-6 record. And after winning the Super Bowl last year, the Texans go 8-9 and will not go to the playoffs. Darius Knight throws for 4,800 yards, 44 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. And on the ground, what did he do? He ran for another 2 touchdowns. And Dylan Knight goes back to throwing for 5,000 yards, just barely, 41 touchdowns and 7 interceptions, and then on the ground he ran for another 3 touchdowns. And Zach Knight finishes the season with 3,900 yards, being the first quarterback out of this group to not throw for 4,000 yards in a season. He also had 37 touchdowns and 10 interceptions, and let's see how much he ran the ball. 143 times for 911 yards and another 9 touchdowns. And Anthony Knight comes in with almost 5,000 yards, 33 touchdowns, and 14 interceptions. And on the ground, he ran the ball 67 times and got 3 touchdowns. And we had no chance of our quarterbacks meeting in the Super Bowl, but finally Dylan Knight, in the 12th season of the simulation, goes to the Super Bowl and can finally get his first Super Bowl win. He is the only one of these 4 without one. And quarterback Dylan Knight finally wins a Super Bowl, becoming the last of these 4 to finally win one. He does also win Super Bowl MVP, and for the first time since his 2nd year in the league, Darius Knight wins league MVP. And once again, no one has switched teams, so we are jumping to the end of Season 13. And now here at the end of Season 13, the Commanders finish 10-7 and get in as a wild card. And the defending Super Bowl champion Atlanta Falcons come in 13-4 and get the 1 seed. And the 49ers finish 12-5 and win the division. And a season after missing the playoffs, the Texans come back and win their division at 11-6. And Darius Knight finishes with almost 4,700 yards, 43 touchdowns to 9 interceptions, and on the ground he ran 42 times for 2 more touchdowns. And Dylan Knight comes in with 5,100 yards, 49 touchdowns to 10 interceptions, and on the ground he ran 70 times for 3 more scores. And this season, Zach Knight throws for 4,200 yards, 39 touchdowns to 12 interceptions, and on the ground he ran 133 times for 700 yards and another 6 touchdowns. And Anthony Knight throws for almost 5,300 yards, 48 touchdowns, 14 interceptions, and he ran in for 1 more touchdown. And this year, all of our quarterbacks are back in the playoffs, so we have another shot to get a Super Bowl matchup between 2 of our quarterbacks. And we never even got close to it this year because the Texans lost in the first round 40-37. The NFC side, we at least had a matchup in the NFC Championship between 2 of our quarterbacks. And we also had a matchup in the divisional round where Dylan Knight got the best of Darius Knight. And the Falcons failed to win back-to-back Super Bowls. They fall to the Raiders 31-21. And I'm now jumping to the end of Season 14 because yet again, no one has changed teams. I am honestly surprised how much they are staying with the original teams, or they've only changed teams 1 time. And this is probably one of the reasons why Darius Knight has never left Washington. They finished 12-5 and as the 1 seed. And the Falcons will finish 10-7 and after back-to-back Super Bowl appearances do not make the playoffs. But for the 2nd year in a row, the 49ers will finish 12-5 and win their division. And the Texans will also finish 12-5, winning their division. And Darius Knight will finish Season 14 with 4,900 yards, 41 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions. And on the ground, he ran 30 times and got into the end zone 1 time. And Dylan Knight, even though he didn't make the playoffs, still finishes with 5,400 yards, 48 touchdowns, and 18 interceptions. And on the ground, he ran for 261 and 1 more touchdown. And yet again, Zach Knight finishes with under 4,000 yards, but they are 12-5, so I'm sure they're fine with that. He has 47 passing touchdowns and 7 interceptions. He also led the team in rushing yards with 982 yards and 9 touchdowns. And Anthony Knight finishes this year with 5,500 yards, 45 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. And on the ground, I imagine he didn't do much, 48 carries and 1 score. And we once again don't even really get close to having 2 of our quarterbacks in the Super Bowl. The Texans get bounced in the wildcard round, but yet again we did have a matchup in the Conference Championship. And in Season 14, Zach Knight wins his 2nd Super Bowl with the 49ers, 42-20. He also gets League MVP, Super Bowl MVP, and is the Offensive Player of the Year. And I know I said at the beginning of the video that we were going to go 15 seasons. This is Season 15, but I've decided we're going to go till everyone retires just because at this point I've already been recording this over 3 hours. What's another couple hours if I want to see how long these guys actually play in the league? And we still have not seen any of them switch teams since Season 5 when Zach Knight left the Jets and signed with the 49ers. And now at the end of Season 15, the Commanders are 11-6 and they win the division. Last season, the Falcons went 10-7 and barely missed the playoffs, but this year they took no risk. They go 12-5 and win the division. And the defending Super Bowl champion San Francisco 49ers come out and get the 1 seed by going 14-3. And I have not been keeping track of division winners, so that could be wrong here, but this might be the first time that they all get into the playoffs by winning their divisions. And Darius Knight throws for 4,900 yards, 46 touchdowns, and 12 interceptions on the year, and on the ground he ran 47 times for 2 more touchdowns. And Dylan Knight still throwing for 5,000 yards almost every single year. I think there's only been 3 seasons where he didn't, but he also throws 47 touchdowns and 13 interceptions, and on the ground he ran 44 times and got 1 more score. And Zach Knight comes out this year with 4,600 yards, which is the most he's thrown for since his rookie season. His rookie year he threw for 4,700 yards, so this is the most that he has thrown for the 49ers, and he also threw 42 touchdowns and 11 interceptions, and on the ground 141 carries, led the team in yards with 864 and 10 rushing touchdowns. And in season 15, Anthony Knight comes out and throws his best touchdown to interception ratio of his career. 5,079 yards, 45 touchdowns, only 5 interceptions, and on the ground he ran for 212 yards and 2 touchdowns. I said this while the season was simulating, but I'll go ahead and say it again just in case someone didn't hear it or they skipped forward in the video. I originally said this was only going to be 15 seasons, but because this has taken me so long, we're just going to go until all 4 have retired. And will season 15 finally be the year where we get a Super Bowl matchup between 2 of our quarterbacks? And finally, after 15 seasons, it happens. We get 2 of our 4 quarterbacks to meet in the Super Bowl. It'll be Zach Knight against Anthony Knight. They also met in the NFC Championship where Dylan Knight lost to Zach Knight in the 49ers, and it looks like Darius Knight lost in the wildcard round. And here is the big importance of the Super Bowl. If the 49ers win, then Zach Knight will have 3 rings, which will tie Anthony Knight and Darius Knight. If you remember, Darius Knight won 3 Super Bowls in the first 5 years. They have yet to win one since then. But if the Texans win, then the undrafted quarterback will have 4 rings, which will be more than any of these 4. And the 49ers have won back-to-back Super Bowls now, and quarterback Zach Knight wins League MVP, Super Bowl MVP, and Offensive Player of the Year for the 2nd straight year. That is his 5th NFL MVP award. And before we start season 16, everyone is still on the same team, just so you guys can see that here. I'm really surprised that they have all stayed on the same team. I know I've said that already in this video, but whenever I did the last one, he changed teams a lot later in his career, and now we're going into season 16, and Zach Knight has played for 2 teams, Anthony Knight has played for 2, and these 2 are still the teams that drafted them. And the Commanders do not win the division, but they go 10-7 and get into a wildcard spot. Darius Knight has only missed the playoffs 1 time in his entire career, and that was back at season 3. And for a 2nd straight year, the Atlanta Falcons go 12-5 and win their division. And after winning back-to-back Super Bowls, the Niners will go 9-8 and completely miss the playoffs. But we will still have a chance for 2 of our quarterbacks to meet in the Super Bowl because the Texans win their division at 10-7. And Darius Knight finishes with 5,300 yards, 43 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions, and then he ran in for 3 more touchdowns. And Dylan Knight once again over 5,000 yards, 42 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions, and then on the ground he ran for 261 yards but no touchdowns. And Zach Knight throws for a little under 4,000 yards in San Francisco, 30 touchdowns and 11 interceptions, and on the ground 130 carries, 758 yards, and 7 touchdowns. And Anthony Knight coming in with another 5,000 yard year, 40 touchdowns and 13 interceptions, and then on the ground he ran in for 1 extra touchdown. Well, the Texans got bounced in the wildcard round, and so did the Commanders, but the Falcons make it all the way to the Super Bowl, where Dylan Knight will try to get his 2nd Super Bowl title. And quarterback Dylan Knight and the Atlanta Falcons get their 2nd Super Bowl ring here, and he wins a Super Bowl MVP for the 2nd time in his career, and Darius Knight wins League MVP. And we have our first quarterback that is retiring. Quarterback Dylan Knight retires after 16 years. He goes out on top, winning a Super Bowl. And it's incredibly rare for a player to play their entire career in one location, but he never left Atlanta. He finishes with 1 League MVP award, 2 Super Bowl MVPs, and 2 rings. And I know you can see guys on this list like Anthony Knight and Darius Knight, but Dylan Knight retires with 82,784 yards, finishing in 4th place in NFL history. He also finishes with 695 touchdown passes, which is good for 4th place. And we finally have another team change. Anthony Knight has left the Houston Texans and signed with the Los Angeles Rams. And I'm not gonna lie, it's a little weird sitting here and only seeing 3 players with the last name Knight after doing this for so long with 4 quarterbacks. And I've simulated season 17, but before I get into that, I want to show you guys that Dylan Knight did apparently make the Hall of Fame. I guess they immediately put them in this game rather than wait 5 seasons, but whatever. But Dylan Knight is in the Hall of Fame. And now to look at the standings for season 17. The Commanders win the division yet again, going 11-6. And I didn't even think about this at the beginning of the year, but now that we have 2 quarterbacks in the same division, they can never meet in the Super Bowl now, but both quarterbacks are going to the playoffs. The Rams get in at 14-3, and the 49ers get in at 9-8. And now in season 17, for the first time in his career, Darius Knight does not hit 40 touchdown passes. He throws for a little under 4,400 yards, 38 touchdown passes, and 5 interceptions. And then on the ground, he ran for another 4 touchdowns. And this season, Zach Knight throws for a little over 4,000 yards, 34 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions. And on the ground, he's still running for about 750 yards and 9 touchdowns. And in his 17th season, in his first season in LA, Anthony Knight throws for 5,000 yards, 44 touchdowns, and only 2 interceptions. That is absolutely insane. He also runs 54 times for another 5 touchdowns. And both Zach Knight in the 49ers and Darius Knight in the Commanders lose in the wildcard round, but Anthony Knight in his first season with the Rams has taken them to the Super Bowl. And quarterback Anthony Knight will officially have the most Super Bowl rings out of these guys right now, winning his 4th here, 35-28. And none of them retired this season, so there will be a season 18. And no one changed teams, so I went ahead and jumped to the end of season 18, where the Commanders go 9-8. And unless I've been keeping track of this wrong, that is the first time I believe the Commanders have missed the playoffs since season 3 of this video. And the 49ers will also be missing the playoffs because for the 3rd straight year they finished 9-8, but it is not good enough to get them into the playoffs this time. And the Rams finished as the 1 seed and 14-3 again. And like I've done this entire video, we will start with the Commanders. Darius Knight, 4,800 yards, 38 touchdowns, and 11 interceptions. So for the first 16 years of his career, he always hit at least 40 touchdowns, and the last 2 he has gotten 38. What about running the ball? This year he runs 46 times for 5 touchdowns. And Zach Knight for the 49ers goes for 3,400 yards, 35 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions. And running the ball this year, he only ran for 722 yards and only 3 touchdowns, which I think is his lowest since joining the 49ers. And then there's Anthony Knight with the Los Angeles Rams. He doesn't put up quite the numbers he did last year, but 4,800 yards, 38 touchdowns, and only 8 interceptions. And then running the ball, he ran 61 times for a little over 300 yards and 2 touchdowns. But Anthony Knight cannot get to the Super Bowl this year. They lose to the Giants in the conference championship 30-29. And it takes until Super Bowl 75 in the year 2040, but the Chargers finally get their first ever Super Bowl. And we have our next retirement. Quarterback Anthony Knight has retired after 18 years in the league. So Anthony Knight finally retires after 18 seasons in the league. He played for 3 teams. I would say arguably probably the best undrafted rookie of all time. He is a 4-time Super Bowl champion, a 2-time Super Bowl MVP, and a 1-time league MVP. And had Anthony Knight come back for 1 more season, he probably could have passed Tom Brady for the most passing yards in a single career, but he will retire in 2nd place, which is obviously not bad. And then for passing touchdowns, he will retire in 2nd place because Darius Knight already has it with 782 and he is still playing. And it took until his 19th season in the league, but Darius Knight has left the Washington Commanders and has signed with the Green Bay Packers. And Zach Knight is still rolling with the 49ers here. And it was pretty obvious since Dylan Knight made it, but Anthony Knight has also made the Hall of Fame. And obviously we saw during the offseason when Anthony Knight retired that Darius Knight now owns the record for most passing touchdowns in a single career, and he could be the first person to ever throw 800 touchdown passes. And yes, Darius Knight could be the first person to throw 800 touchdown passes, but Zach Knight has already scored over 800 touchdowns. He has 702 passing, and if we scroll over here, we can see that he has 127 rushing touchdowns, giving him a total of 829. And Zach Knight is on the list for most passing yards in a single career. He is down here at 10th. But if we scroll up to 4th place, we can see Darius Knight is right here with 88,000. If he has about a 5,000 yard season, he could theoretically pass Tom Brady. And for only the second time in his career, Darius Knight will finish the season with a losing record, and it's definitely the first time in his career he's missed the playoffs 2 years in a row. And the 49ers finished the season 7-10, so for the first time in this video, we will have no one in the playoffs. And if Darius Knight wants the record for most passing yards in a career, he is going to have to come back for at least one more season. He throws for 4,000 yards, 38 touchdowns, and 14 interceptions, which is a career high for him. And on the ground, he runs 48 times for 1 touchdown. So Darius Knight officially becomes the only person in NFL history to throw for 800 touchdowns. And I know I showed before the season that Zach Knight had over 800. Well, Darius Knight also did before the season because he has 46 rushing touchdowns. So right now in his career, he has 866 touchdowns. And Zach Knight will finish this season with 3,800 yards, 35 touchdowns, and 11 interceptions. And on the ground, he ran 124 times for 748 yards and 7 more touchdowns. So in 2040, we got to see the Chargers finally win their first Super Bowl. Well, in 2041, we finally get to see the Titans win their first Super Bowl. And quarterback Darius Knight has decided to retire after 19 seasons. He will not pass Tom Brady's passing record, and I think it is pretty safe because I don't see Zach Knight passing it. So Darius Knight will retire as the only person to have thrown 800 touchdown passes in NFL history. He won the Offensive Rookie of the Year his first year in the league. He is also a 3-time Super Bowl champion, a 3-time Super Bowl MVP, and a 4-time league MVP. And he retires about 900 yards away from passing Tom Brady as the all-time passing yards leader. But like I said a second ago, he is the first person to ever throw 800 touchdown passes in the NFL with 820. Well, Zach Knight is the last one standing going into now his 20th year in the league, so I guess we'll figure out exactly how long he wants to play. Also, I know it is not much of a shock, but Darius Knight also gets into the Hall of Fame, so now they are probably just waiting on Zach Knight to retire to put him in. And after 3 seasons of going 9-8 and then a 7-10 year, the 49ers have bounced back with a 12-5 season, getting the 1 seed. And he still had a pretty solid season, a little under 4,000 yards, 37 touchdowns, and only 3 interceptions, and then on the ground he ran for 831 yards and 9 touchdowns. So I showed you that Darius Knight was the first person, and as of right now, the only person to have ever thrown for 800 touchdowns in a single career. Well, how about this for Zach Knight? With 774 passing touchdowns and 143 rushing touchdowns, he is the first person to cross 900 career touchdowns. He has 917. And the 49ers do come in as a 1 seed here in the playoffs like I showed earlier. So can we get a Cinderella story ending, or do we win a Super Bowl and try to come back, or do we get bounced before we can even get there? And apparently the ghost of Darius Knight comes back to haunt us as we get bounced in the divisional round 28-30 against the 7-seed Commanders. So in 2040, we finally got to see the Chargers win a Super Bowl, getting their first win in Super Bowl 75. And then in Super Bowl 76, we watched the Titans win their first Super Bowl in 2041. And now in 2042, the Cleveland Browns have finally won their first Super Bowl. And yeah, this took a while, but the NFL MVP is Zach Knight along with the Offensive Player of the Year. And now for the moment of truth. Does Zach Knight come back for one more season, or does the video end here? Scroll all the way down to the 49ers and no one is here, so Zach Knight is returning for his 21st season. And he is still with the 49ers going into his 21st season, so let's see how good they are this year. And the 49ers are headed back to the playoffs as they win the division, going 11-6. And in his 21st season in the league, Zach Knight throws for 4,000 yards, 38 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions, and on the ground runs 163 times for 933 yards and 11 touchdowns. Another stat that's not going to show up here in this game is Zach Knight has 87,000 passing yards and 15,000 rushing yards. So he is the first player ever to go for over 100,000 yards in his career. But sadly, season 21 once again ends against the Washington Commanders. The ghost of Darius Knight is going to try to keep him down, and the Super Bowl will be between the Browns and the Seahawks. And the Seahawks take home the win here in 2043 in the Super Bowl, but Zach Knight gets his 8th NFL MVP award. And here is the next big moment. Does Zach Knight retire? Let's open up the retirement screen. He doesn't show up there. Let's scroll down to the 49ers. Will we have a season 22 in this video? Yes, we will. He is coming back. And as we get ready for Zach Knight's 22nd season here in the NFL, I want to point out to you guys that he has 966 career touchdowns. So if he gets 34 touchdowns this year, he will be the first ever and probably the only ever player to score 1,000 touchdowns in his career. And I think Zach Knight would have to come back for 2 seasons in order to pass Tom Brady. He is about 6,000 yards away here. But in passing touchdowns, that is very much doable. He is in second place with 812. He only needs 8 to tie Darius Knight. 22 seasons is where the last time I did a video like this ended up ending. Whenever I did one 99 overall quarterback and put him in the league, he stayed for 22 years. So if Zach Knight goes past that, that'll be pretty impressive. And the 49ers are still going pretty strong. They finished 12-5 and are going to be the 1 seed in the NFC. And Zach Knight finishes the season with 4,100 yards, 36 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions. But with the 36 touchdowns, he has officially passed Darius Knight for the most passing touchdowns in a single career, and he also becomes the first player ever to score 1,000 total touchdowns in their career. And then he still has these 6 touchdowns on the ground and another 767 yards. But sadly, his 22nd season will end in the divisional round again. That is 3 straight seasons we have lost in the divisional round of the playoffs. And the Atlanta Falcons win the Super Bowl here in 2044, but Zach Knight is the league MVP and Offensive Player of the Year. That is his 9th MVP award and his 6th Offensive Player of the Year award. So now here it is. Will we have a 23rd season from quarterback Zach Knight? We'll scroll down to the 49ers here. Has he retired? And he retires after 22 years. And Zach Knight will retire as a 3-time Super Bowl champion, a 2-time Super Bowl MVP, a 6-time Offensive Player of the Year, and a 9-time league MVP. And Zach Knight will finish 4th in career passing yards. Dylan Knight got bumped all the way down to 6th because he was one of the first ones to retire, but I like to see that all of my guys are here. And in passing touchdowns, Zach Knight retires as the leader with 848. And not that it's much of a shock, but Zach Knight also gets into the Hall of Fame, so now all 4 of our quarterbacks are officially in the Hall of Fame.